My bakery was about to close forever. A panicked old man begged me for a cake. I helped him. The next day, a woman walked in. "My grandfather told me about you," she said, and made me an offer I couldn't refuse. I was minutes from closing my struggling bakery for the night when an old man rushed in, begging me to bake a last-minute cake for his wife's 80th birthday. He'd completely forgotten. I worked all night, pouring my heart into it. I had no idea that his granddaughter was the city's most feared food critic, and that my small act of kindness was about to become the most important review of my entire career. This is a story about a cake that saved a dream. Before we fire up the ovens, I'd love to know what city are you watching from today, and be sure to subscribe for our daily stories. Okay, let's head to that bakery. There is a particular kind of heartbreak that comes from watching your own dream die a slow and very quiet death. For the last 2 years, my bakery, the sweetest thing, had been my entire world. I had poured my life savings and a loan from a bank that I was now hopelessly behind into this place. It was a beautiful little shop, a jewel box of a bakery filled with the warm, comforting scent of my own grandmother's recipes for cinnamon and butter and slowly caramelizing sugar. It was in every way the bakery of my dreams. It was a complete and total failure. It was 9 p.m. on a Friday night. I was alone, as I always was at closing time. I stood behind the long, beautiful, and completely empty glass display case. I looked at the numbers on my tablet. The numbers did not lie. They were a cold, hard, and deeply unforgiving testament to my own failure. I was 2 months behind on rent. The final notice from the bank was sitting on my small, cluttered desk in the back. The dream was over. I knew with a certainty that was a cold, hard stone in the pit of my stomach that I had 1, maybe 2 weeks left before I would have to lock this door for the very last time. I was in the middle of wiping down the counters, familiar and deeply depressing end-of-day ritual. When the small, cheerful bell above the front door chimed, I looked up a flicker of a long-since dashed hope in my own heart. But it was not a customer, not a real one. It was an old man, and he was not here to buy a croissant. He was here in a state of pure, unadulterated, and deeply desperate panic. He was in his late 70s, impeccably dressed in an old but very fine tweed coat. And his face was a mask of pure white and soul-shattering terror. He looked at the empty display cases, and then at me, his eyes a kind and very gentle shade of blue-wide with a frantic, pleading energy. "Please," he said, his voice, a ragged, breathless whisper as he rushed to the counter. "Please, young lady, tell me you are not closed. I have made a terrible, a catastrophic, a life-ruiningly terrible mistake. And you," he said, his gaze landing on me as if I were the last single, solitary hope in his entire crumbling world, "you are my last and my only hope." I looked at the old man who had just burst through my door. His panic was a palpable thing, frantic, chaotic energy that was at odds with the quiet, resigned despair of my own heart. "Whoa, slow down, sir," I said, my voice, a calm, gentle thing. I did not feel. "Tell me what's wrong." And the story tumbled out of him, a jumbled, desperate, and deeply endearing confession. His name was Calvin. And tomorrow, he explained, his voice, a ragged, breathless whisper, was his wife, Eleanor's 80th birthday. Her husband of 55 years had in a moment of what he could only describe as a complete and total catastrophic failure of his own mind, completely and totally forgotten about it. He had been so consumed with her recent health scare, a long and worrying bout of pneumonia, that the date had simply vanished from his mind. He had woken up this morning, realized his terrible, unforgivable mistake, and had spent the entire day in a frantic and completely fruitless search for a proper cake. But every bakery in town was either closed or completely booked. "She deserves a parade, young lady," he said, his own kind blue eyes now shining with a film of unshed, desperate tears. "A damn parade. And, two, don't even have a cupcake to give her. She will wake up tomorrow morning on her 80th birthday, and she will think that I have forgotten her. And I do not think," he said, his voice now breaking my own heart, "possibly bear it." I looked at him, at this kind and loving and deeply devoted old man who was so clearly and so completely in love with his wife. And I thought of my own dream for this bakery. I had started it not to get rich, to create things that made people happy, to be a part of their small and beautiful and important celebrations. And I had failed. The practical and deeply exhausted part of my brain was screaming at me to say no. I was tired, I was broke, I was out of ingredients. I was on the verge of losing the very shop he was standing in. This was not my problem. But then he looked at me, and his gaze was full of a pure and simple and deeply human plea. And the baker in me, the girl who had learned her craft at her own grandmother's knee, the girl who believed in the simple, magical power of a birthday cake, she refused to let the tired and cynical businesswoman win. "What kind of cake?" I asked. My voice, a quiet and deeply resigned sigh, "is her favorite?" His entire face lit up with a brilliant and beautiful and life-affirming hope. He said, his voice now a happy, excited thing. She loves the classics, a 3-layer, red velvet cake with a real old-fashioned cream, cheese frosting. And he added, his eyes twinkling. If it is not too much trouble. She is very particular about a single perfect sugar sponge rose on the top. I almost laughed, a 3-layer red velvet with a cream cheese frosting. And a hand-spun sugar rose. It was not a simple cake. It was an 8-hour deeply technical and very expensive work of art. I just nodded, Calvin. I said, my own voice, a quiet and deeply foolish sound. I can do that. He was so grateful. He was practically vibrating. He tried to pay me, pulling a thick wad of cash from his wallet. I just held up a hand. You can pay me in the morning. I said, when you pick it up, 10 a.m. it will be ready. I watched as he walked out of my shop, a new and happy and deeply hopeful spring in his step. And then I was alone again in the quiet, dark, and now very late bakery. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 9:30 p.m. I was facing an all-night and completely and totally unprofitable task for a single solitary cake for a complete and total stranger. It was, by any rational business school metric, the single, stupidest, and most indefensible business decision of my entire and very short career. But as I walked back into my kitchen, as I tied on my flour-dusted apron, as I pulled out my own grandmother's old and well-loved recipe book, and as I turned on the big industrial mixer, its familiar, comforting were a welcome sound in the silent shop. I felt a flicker of something I had not felt in a very long time. It was not the feeling of a businesswoman, or of a failure, or of a woman who was about to lose her dream. It was the feeling of a baker, a real one. It was for now enough. I spent that night in a quiet, flower-dusted, and strangely beautiful state of grace. The city outside my small bakery window was a dark and sleeping and distant thing. In my kitchen, under the warm, buzzing glow of the fluorescent lights, a small and deeply important world was coming to life. I was not just a businesswoman anymore, a woman haunted by the cold, hard numbers of a failing business. I was a baker, a craftsman, an artist, and I was creating a masterpiece. I didn't use the cheaper bulk ingredients I had been forced to use for the past few months to try and save on costs. I went to the back of my pantry to the small hidden stash of my special occasion supplies. The ones I had been saving for a day that I was beginning to fear would never come. I used the imported Belgian chocolate, the vanilla beans. I had been hoarding like a dragon's treasure. The fresh organic cream cheese. I would lose money on this cake, a significant amount. But I found to my own surprise, I did not care. This was not about profit. This was about honor, honoring my own craft and honoring the 55 years of a love story. I had been given a small and beautiful pardon. As I worked through the long, quiet hours of the night, my own exhaustion seemed to melt away, replaced by a new and deeply forgotten sense of joy. I remembered my own grandmother, the woman who had taught me how to bake her kind, flour-dusted hands, guiding my own. I remembered the look on my own mother's face when I had presented her with her 50th birthday cake. I remembered that baking for me had never been about business. It had always been about love. By sunrise, the cake was complete. It was a magnificent, 3-tiered, deep, red velvet monument to a life lived. The cream cheese frosting was a smooth, perfect, and pristine white. And on the very top, a thing of pure crystalline and beautiful fragility, was a single perfect hand-spun sugar rose, its petals so thin they were almost translucent, a single perfect dewdrop of spun sugar clinging to its stem. It was without a single solitary doubt the most beautiful thing I had ever created. I placed it in a large, elegant box, a box I had been saving for a wedding that had been canceled. I sat down in one of my own empty cafe chairs to wait, a strange and deeply peaceful sense of purpose settling over me. I had lost my business. I had failed at my dream. But on this one single and very last night, I had been a true baker again. And it was enough. Precisely 10 a.m., the cheerful old-fashioned bell above my door chimed. Calvin, the old man, walked in. He looked tired and nervous and deeply hopeful. And then he saw the box on the counter. I opened it for him. He just stared at the cake, and his own kind blue eyes filled with a fresh, new and beautiful wave of tears. He did not say a word. He just reached across the counter and took my own flour-dusted hand in his. Thank you, my dear, he whispered, his voice, a raw and deeply grateful thing. You have not just saved a forgetful old man's life. You have honored his wives. And that is a gift I can never repay. I watched as he walked out of my shop carrying the cake as if it were the most precious and most fragile thing in the entire world. As the door chimed, his departure felt this strange and final sense of a chapter closing. My work here, I thought, was finally and truly done. I had no idea that a few blocks away at a large and very boisterous 80th birthday party, my cake was about to become the star of a show I had not been invited to. I had no idea that one of the guests at that party, a young woman with a sharp, intelligent face and an even sharper and more influential pen, was about to become the angel, the investor, and the unsolicited and deeply miraculous marketing director. My small, failing bakery had been so desperately and so hopelessly praying for. Giuliani, the granddaughter, arrived at her grandmother's 80th birthday party with a heavy heart. She loved her grandparents with a fierceness. That was the only truly soft thing in her otherwise armored life. As the city's most influential and often most feared food critic, her life was a world of cynicism, of pretentious restaurants and fragile chef egos. And today she was furious with her grandfather Calvin. The party, which should have been a glorious celebration of a life lived, was a tense and slightly sad affair. Her grandfather had forgotten his wife's 80th birthday. There was no cake. Her grandmother, a woman of infinite grace, was pretending not to care. Juliana knew her. She saw the small, trembling disappointment in the corners of her eyes. It was in the middle of this quiet, suburban tragedy that her grandfather, who had disappeared an hour earlier, returned. He burst in through the back door, his own face flushed from the cold air, his eyes shining with an almost manic relief in his arms. He was carrying a large, elegant, white box from a bakery Juliana had never seen before. "I got it," he announced to the room, his voice a triumphant boom. "I got it." His wife just looked at him, a mixture of love and exasperation on her face. He placed the box on the dining room table, opened it. The room went silent. Juliana, a woman who had tasted the creations of the most famous chefs in the world, just stared. Cake was a work of art. It was not a modern minimalist creation. It was something from the old world. A masterpiece of a skill she had thought was extinct. 3 perfect tiers of a deep red velvet, a cream cheese frosting that was applied with a hand so steady it looked like porcelain. And on the very top, a single hand spun sugar, rose petals so delicate. They looked as if they might shudder with a breath. And then grandfather, with tears of gratitude streaming down his own face, told them the story of a young female baker, of a failing shop, and of an all-night act of kindness that had saved a foolish old man from breaking his own wife's heart. When they cut the cake, Juliana took a fork with the trained skepticism of a professional. Looked beautiful, yes, but the taste was the only truth. She took a bite. And Juliana's cynical world, weary and professional world, simply stopped. Cake was not good. It was a revelation. The texture was light and moist and perfect. Frosting was a sublime balance of sweet and tangy. It was not just a cake, was a story tasted of a grandmother's old recipe book, a real ingredients of time. Patience tasted of something that had become vanishingly rare in her world. It tasted of love. She looked at her grandfather, pure, relieved joy on his face. She looked at her grandmother, who was taking a bite of her own, and she saw a genuine, radiant smile spread across her face for the first time that day. And Juliana, the feared critic, the woman who could make or break a restaurant, with the single devastating paragraph, felt something new, a sense of purpose. She took out her phone. She looked at the name of the small, unknown bakery on the side of the box. The sweetest thing, as the city's most honest food critic, she knew what she had to do. This was not just a story about a cake. This was the story of the year, and she was going to tell it. I spent the rest of that Saturday in a quiet, bittersweet haze. After Calvin, the old man had left with the birthday cake. A profound and final sense of peace had settled over me. I had done one last good thing. I had honored my own craft. I had helped a good man honor his wife. It was, I thought, a beautiful and fitting final chapter for my small and failed bakery. I spent the afternoon cleaning my kitchen with a meticulous and almost reverent care, preparing it not for the next day's baking, but for the cold, impersonal inspection of the bank representative who would be coming to liquidate it next week. That night I went home and I slept a deep and dreamless. And for the first time in a year, completely untroubled sleep. The fight was over. I had lost, and I was in a strange and weary way peace with it. The next morning, I woke up late, and the first thing I noticed was the silence. My phone, which was usually a source of a quiet but constant anxiety alerts from the bank. Emails from worried suppliers was completely and strangely silent. And then at precisely 9 a.m., it began to buzz not once, but a dozen times. A frantic, insistent, and completely unfamiliar series of notifications. Annoyed, picked it up, assuming it was a glitch. It was not a glitch, it was a flood. My little bakery's dormant social media page, which usually got 2 or 3 likes a week, was exploding, dozens. And then hundreds of new followers, mentions, tags, confused. I opened the link that a friend had frantically tested me. It was a link to the city's most popular and most influential food blog. A blog run by a notoriously sharp and brutally honest critic, known only by her first name, Juliana. Her reviews were the stuff of legend, a single witty paragraph from her, capable of making or breaking the most expensive restaurants in the city. And the lead story on her blog this morning. The story that the entire food-obsessed world of my city was now reading was not about a trendy new downtown eatery. It was about a small and failing neighborhood bakery. It was about me. The title of the article was Simple on a Forgetful Grandfather and the Best Red Velvet Cake in America. I read it, my own hands trembling, my heart, a wild, frantic drum in my chest. It was a masterpiece. She told the whole beautiful human story. She wrote of her own family's quiet near-disaster of a birthday party. She wrote of her grandfather's frantic last-minute quest. She wrote of the unknown heroic baker who had in the middle of the night saved the day. And then she wrote about the cake. She did not just describe it. She wrote a love letter to it. She wrote of the impossibly light and yet flavorful crumb. She wrote of the perfect architectural balance of the cream cheese frosting. She wrote of the single, perfect, and heartbreaking. The beautiful sugar spun rose on the top. And she concluded with a single and life-altering paragraph. I have eaten at the finest restaurants in the world. She wrote, I've had desserts that were created by Michelin-starred gods. Cake. I ate last night, cake that was baked, not for profit, not for glory, but as a simple and profound act of human kindness. It was without a single solitary doubt the best cake I have ever had in my entire life. The sweetest thing is not just a bakery, it is a treasure. We as a city are fools to be letting it die. I finished the article. The tears I had not allowed myself to cry for months now streaming down my face. And then the phone on my bakery counterphone that had been silent for weeks began to ring. It did not stop ringing for the rest of the day. The next morning on a Monday, when I arrived at my small and supposedly doomed bakery, there was a line, not a small line, a line of people that stretched down the block and around the corner. They were all there, their faces full of a bright and hopeful and hungry curiosity. I spent that entire day in a state of a joyful, chaotic disbelief. I sold out of everything I had by 10 a.m., took more orders for my grandmother's red velvet cake than I had in the entire previous year. I laughed and I cried and I baked. It was late that afternoon, as I was frantically trying to clean up the beautiful, glorious mess of my sold-out shop, that the bell above my door chimed. One last time I looked up tired, but I'm so sorry, we're sold out already on my lips, but it was not a customer. It was her, Juliana, the famous and now legendary food critic. She was not there as a critic. She was just a young woman with a kind, intelligent, amused smile on her face. She looked at my flour, dusted apron, at the chaotic, but now very much alive state of my wonderful, beautiful, and now miraculously saved little bakery. She said, her voice a warm and friendly thing. It looks like you're going to be busy for a while. She then gestured to the empty bakery case. I believe she said, her smile widening, that you're going to need some help. I just laughed a sound of pure, unadulterated, and slightly hysterical joy. Help, I said, gesturing to the completely empty display cases, the long chalk-written list of new orders on the board behind me. I think I'm going to need a lot more than help. I think I'm going to need a miracle. She just smiled, calm smile. I don't believe in miracles, Rosa, she said, her voice a quiet and very businesslike instrument. I believe in good investments. And she said, her gaze sweeping over my small, humble, and now very much alive little shop, are the best investment I have seen in this city in a very long time. Her offer of help was not to wash dishes. It was a business proposition. She explained that she had been looking for a project to invest in, not just with her money, her own formidable business acumen. She wanted to become my silent partner. She would handle the business side, the marketing, the expansion, the numbers, things I was so terrible at, and I, she said, would be left to do the one thing I was born to do, bake on one single and non-negotiable condition, that the heart of the bakery, the soul of it, my grandmother's recipes, my commitment to quality, my good neighbor policy of kindness, would never ever change. It was a deal I accepted without a moment's hesitation. The months that followed were a whirlwind of hard and joyful, satisfying work with Juliana guidance and a much-needed infusion of capital. We did not just save the bakery, we transformed it. We renovated the small, cramped kitchen. We hired a small, talented staff. The sweetest thing was no longer a struggling one-woman show. It was a thriving, beautiful, and beloved city institution. In Juliana, the feared food critic, and I, the quiet, humble baker, we became the most unlikely and the most wonderful of friends. We were two women from two completely different worlds, bound together by a shared and passionate love for good food, by the strange and beautiful serendipitous story of a forgetful old man and a last-minute birthday cake. The story ends as it began, with a cake. It is a year later on a bright and beautiful Saturday afternoon. My bakery is closed to the public today. It is for a private party. The party is for Calvin's wife Eleanor on her 81st birthday. The room is filled with the warm, happy, and chaotic sound of their entire and very large family. Calvin, is there his face a picture of pure, unadulterated joy? His wife is beside him, her own face, a beautiful and radiant smile. And then I bring out the cake. It is a magnificent 3-tiered red velvet masterpiece, perfect echo of the one I had made a year ago. But I am not the one carrying it alone. Beside me, helping me is my partner, my friend, my sister, Juliana. We place the cake on the table, and the entire room erupts in a chorus of happy birthday. I look around at my beautiful and thriving and now very much alive bakery. I look at the happy, smiling faces of my new and very much loved found family. I think about the woman I had been a year ago. The lonely, defeated woman who had been just minutes away from locking the door on her own failed dream for the very last time. I had thought on that long and desperate foolish night that I was just baking a cake, a final and beautifully pointless act of kindness. I had no idea that I was not just baking a cake. I was baking a new life, a new future, my own, an absolutely beautiful and heartwarming story about how a single selfless act can be the one ingredient that changes everything. What do you think of Juliana's incredible review and her decision to partner with the bakery? Let us know in the comments below. If you were moved by this incredible feel-good story, please show your support by hitting that like button and be sure to subscribe for more uplifting and powerful stories. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.